Recently, I watched this live stream on the Lone Gunman podcast with Rob Clark and Joe Borelli. Rob Clark, of course, is best known for his work on Dago and on Fletcher Prouty. And Joe Borelli is known best for this. And this is a great episode of the Lone Gunman podcast, especially if you're personally interested in investigating the assassination and all the weird things around it. And this is the Martin film as it exists now in the Sixth Floor Museum in their possession. This film is not the original. This is known for certain. This is not the original because the film, the Sixth Floor Museum, has a date code on it indicating that it was made in the 1970s, I think 1977. And it's not known where the original ended up, if it still exists, but judging from the information as is presented, it probably was taken, well, I'll get into the story a little more, but as the story goes, if you have to judge by the official story, then probably the FBI kept it when they got it and sent something else back to Martin. But it's kind of murky, and if you want to get into that side of it, go watch the Lone Gunman podcast. But anyway, here we are at General Walker's house. John T. Martin was a student from St. Paul, Minnesota, and he went to Dallas, and he photographed General Walker's house, and he actually photographed from inside the house. We don't get a shot of General Walker at all. We get a shot of the window that apparently was shot through by Oswald or somebody. And that's it. Nothing that shows General Walker, which is kind of odd. If this John Martin is a fan of Walker, you'd think he would photograph General Walker. But anyway, they got on a plane after that. They, presumably Martin and his family, and then they went to New Orleans. And they took some scenes in New Orleans. I don't know what this is. I think there's a seal coming up soon. Should I even show the whole film? I don't know. I think this is just trees somewhere. This is probably the seal. I can't see it very well on my screen. There's the seal. I don't know where the seal would be. And then we'll have a statue coming up. Typical tourist type shot. And then suddenly they just happen to come across Oswald being arrested in New Orleans, where he had this fight with Carlos Bringuier, and apparently the Cubans tore up his leaflets he was handing out. And then they go back home, apparently. So we are supposed to believe that on this single roll of tourist film, John T. Martin photographed the house and the mailbox of General Walker, and of course you know he puts General on his mailbox. And just by pure happenstance, also on this same roll of film, is captured the arrest of Lee Harvey Oswald in a different city, in New Orleans. If this really is pure happenstance, then it's the most amazing coincidence that ever happened. And then we have a second film of Oswald's arrest in New Orleans. Another amazing coincidence. And this is the Doyle film, and the only place I've ever seen it is on the Frontline show that they did on Oswald, Who is Lee Harvey Oswald. And in this show, both the Martin film and the Doyle film are presented by Frontline as one film. That is, they say an amateur photographer captured the scene, and they show scenes from both films. And here I'm just showing the Doyle film as presented on Frontline. I cut out the Martin film scenes. So there's too much coincidence for me here. I don't believe this. I don't think two people just happened to capture on film. Two tourists just happened to capture Oswald's arrest on film. I don't believe that. And I don't believe the Martin film just happened to get General Walker and Lee Harvey Oswald on the same roll of film either. I think the Martin film was created with some film, probably some family vacation film, and with the Doyle film. That is, I think the scene we see in the Martin film actually was originally in the Doyle film. And that the Martin film was created for some purpose by the cover-up. Now, the Doyle film was taken by Jim Doyle, who was a teenage boy, who was there with his parents, who were there with another family, and they were on a convention from Portland, Oregon. And they just happened to come across the scene of Oswald's arrest. And the FBI promptly interviewed the adults in the party, very similar interviews, and as I've highlighted on these 4 interviews, at about 4 o'clock it says that each person said at about 4 o'clock is when this happened. So according to these 4 FBI reports, Oswald's arrest occurred at about 4 o'clock. And on the left here, there's another FBI report, reported to be an interview with Marcel Madden, Mrs. Marcel Madden, at the New Orleans Police Department, where they're getting information about Oswald's arrest. And in the FBI report, it puts the time at 4:15, which would agree with the Doyle interview reports. But on the right-hand side, we have 2 New Orleans Police Department documents. And the time of arrest there looks like it says 3:15, with perhaps a 4 typed over the 3. But it looks like it was originally 3:15. So here is a difference in the time. The FBI is saying 4:15, and it's also saying 4:15 in its 4 interviews of the people who were there. But the arrest report says 3:15. And also note that in their interview with the New Orleans Police Department, the FBI gets blue eyes, whereas on the fingerprint card from the New Orleans Police Department, it says Oswald has brown eyes. Now there is a BL under eyes on the top. These are 2 different documents on the right, and the one on the top does have BL under eyes for blue. But the fingerprint card does say brown. So I'm thinking that the actual arrest time was 3:15, and that the cover-up needs the arrest time to be 4:15, and that these cookie-cutter FBI reports say 4:15 because that's what the FBI wanted there, and that the Martin film was created because Martin, John T. Martin, is a shill for the FBI, or for whoever, probably the FBI, for whoever's doing the cover-up, and they want somebody else to have been a witness to this fracas in New Orleans, and they want that person to be able to say it was actually 4:15 should this become an issue. That is, should the Doyles sometimes say it was at about 3 o'clock, instead of what their FBI reports say, they want to have another witness to confirm that it was actually 4 o'clock, or 4:15. And my explanation for the timing issue here is that the action really did take place on the street at about 3 o'clock, and that Oswald really was put into the police car, but by the time the police car got to the police station, Oswald had been replaced with an impostor with brown eyes, who was booked at 4:15. I think the fingerprints on the fingerprint card are probably not Oswald's. They're probably the impostor's fingerprints. And the impostor, I think, is 5'9". I think Oswald is 5'11". The impostor has brown eyes, Oswald has blue eyes. And I think the photograph up here, which is something that's either attached or put on top of the sheet here, it's not something that's part of the sheet. I think that photograph was probably switched by Frederick O'Sullivan, who was someone who knew Oswald and the CAP, someone who knew Ferry, and somebody who at this time was a police officer for the New Orleans Police Department. I have no evidence of that directly, but that's what I think probably happened. And interestingly, Frederick O'Sullivan later on converted to Judaism, moved to Israel, and worked with the Mossad. And that's according to his son. So I think there's an implication here that Frederick O'Sullivan had some connection to the intelligence agencies if he went from being some cop in New Orleans to working with the Mossad in Israel. And that makes him a likely intelligence asset with the New Orleans Police Department in 1963 when Oswald was arrested. So with an insider like O'Sullivan operating in the operation, I think this switch could have been managed. That is, Oswald could have been arrested, and somebody could be switched with him, and that other person, the imposter, could be booked if you've got an insider in the New Orleans Police Department. And I think the point of all this is to give Oswald an alibi for the time that he was supposedly under arrest. And I think it's very interesting that on the very same day he was arrested, he went to visit his Aunt Lillian in the hospital. He just stayed for a couple minutes, and he seemed very nervous, she said. But what better way to say, here I am, I'm Oswald, I'm in New Orleans, I even went to visit my aunt on August 9th. And then I was arrested, so it had to be me that was arrested and put into jail. So Oswald is taken away in the police car, but the imposter is brought to the police station. And apparently that took some time to make the switch, and the imposter is booked at 4:15, and the imposter has brown eyes, and I bet you those are different fingerprints. If you can find a copy of this, it's good enough to make the comparison. And the imposter stayed in jail overnight, and then the imposter had the FBI agent Quigley come over and interview him on Saturday. So now you've got the FBI as a witness that Oswald is indeed here in the New Orleans jail on Saturday morning. Now it could be that Oswald was back already from whatever it was he was doing by the time of the FBI interview, or it could have been the imposter sat for the FBI interview. Whatever, I think by the time he calls his cousin on Saturday, he is actually the person in jail, and now he calls his cousin to come and pick him up, so that we will have yet another witness, a relative who knows him on sight, who will say it's Oswald. This is a fantastic alibi. You've got his Aunt Lillian saying it was Oswald. You've got the arresting officers saying it was Oswald. He's interviewed by the FBI saying it was Oswald. And then you've got his cousin Joyce saying it was Oswald. So there can be no doubt, apparently, that Oswald spent that night and Saturday morning in the New Orleans jail. And this seems like an important, elaborate alibi for an important event, so I think probably Oswald went to Cuba. We have a memo from Hoover saying he told RFK that Oswald went to Cuba on several occasions, and we know of no official story occasion when he did, so I think this might be one of the occasions that the FBI knew about anyway, even though Oswald was creating this elaborate alibi. And I think that's why the Martin film exists at all, that it was created in order to preserve this alibi operation. Not because they want him to have an alibi necessarily, but they don't want it revealed to have been an alibi operation, because then it reveals conspiracy.